Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for coming. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to February's edition of Historic Presentation Night here at Michigan Flight Museum. My name is Becca Folsom, and I am the coordinator of these special programs here at the museum in addition to the membership manager. We have a few exciting events and programs coming up soon. I'd just like to let you guys know. A lot of this is available on the website with more information and ticketing information, but because you're here, I would like to tell you a little bit more about them. Bombers, Berries, and Brews has moved to the museum, so it has in previous years been at the rack, but that will be happening on Saturday, April 5th. It will be here before we know it. Tickets are on sale on the website if that's something that you're interested in. It's a beer and wine event here at the museum. Our annual Thunder Over Michigan Air Show will be here also before you know it. It is taking place right here at Willow Run, June 20th through 22nd. Schedules, ticket options, pricing information is all available on the Thunder Over Michigan website, which is thunderovermichigan.org. We have historic presentation nights on the first Wednesday evening of each month, with the exception of January, so we did not meet last month. Members can reserve tickets for free. I encourage you all to join if you're not a member already. I can help you out with that, and information about membership, the museum, and our upcoming events are all available on the website as well. I'd like to ask everybody in the audience to silence their phones as we are about to get started here with tonight's program, and please hold your questions until the end of the evening. Ric here was born on an Air Force base in Upper Michigan, growing up near the end of the runway at Hay Sawyer. As a documentary producer, he's flown missions from Wordsmith, Sawyer, and Southbridge, and he's written articles about Michigan's air power for Michigan History magazine. Today, he's sharing insight into Willow Run's role in protecting democracy after its bomber production, starting with the Cold War. Now, please help me welcome back tonight's speaker, Ric Mixter. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be back. It's wonderful to be talking airplanes because I've been doing so much shipwreck stuff in the last couple of weeks. I actually dove the Edmund Fitzgerald submarine. What a crazy career I've had, right? Flying airplanes, pulling F-16, 9Gs in an F-16, the Goodyear blimp. As a TV journalist, all the guys would get sick when they flew with the aircraft, except me. And I was like, okay, I'll drive. So every time the Stearman Squadron came to town, I got to fly with them. B-25s, B-24s, B-17s. The only one I didn't get was that B-29, and I'm still hoping that one day that I'd be able to get that flight. In fact, I'll show you a picture. This is how much I loved B-24s as a little kid, and why Willow Run is so important to me. Is the microphone not on?
Turn your mic on.
I've got it on here, right?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, brother. The B-24 was really special for me. In fact, a crazy backstory. Growing up in the UP, we'd play in the backyard. One day I found a diamond ring in the backyard. My mom goes, well, that looks pretty good. Would you want to trade me for it? And I said, sure, what do you want? And I said, the biggest B-24 model that they have. And she goes, okay. So she buys me this $15 model, and which I immediately had a giant glue fingerprint on the windshield and ruined right away. Luckily, though, she saved that diamond ring. Is it still off? Is it going off because I've got it in my pocket? Or?
It should be lit up in front. Just press it once.
Is the battery bad?
Yeah, I hear you pretty good.
Try it now.
I bet you hear me better now. All right, cool. Back to the story. B-24, trade my mom the diamond ring that I find in the woods. She says, oh, what a great deal, and I thought for sure that she just kept the diamond ring, or pawned it, really, growing up. She gives it to me, and when I propose to my wife, she gives me the diamond ring back again. So that many years later, it comes full circle. I got the model, and I got the ring, so pretty cool. B-24s then came into, for me, a fantastic opportunity when they flew into Gladwin, Michigan, and they said, if you want to fly, the only 24 that was flying at the time was the All-American, and you want to fly that to Muskegon, we'd like you to come along. Again, they're trying to get free publicity, for the Confederate Air Force at the time to do flights. And so it was great for me to be able to fly on board there and to really see this, thing that I had built as a kid. But the history of the B-24 bomber could be an entire talk tonight. I'm sure you've heard a lot. Willow Run is synonymous with the B-24, with almost half of all of the B-24s in the war came out of here, and the production and everything is a story in itself. I really want to touch on, of course, the buildings that are here, and then take you full circle. And I'll be jumping back and forth from World War II because there's so many connections to the war effort that eventually goes into building these missiles. And I think you'll be surprised at some of the connections I've actually found, and a lot of the top secret operations that have happened here. Is there anybody here that actually worked at Willow Run Labs? I always hope, because many of my talks I show up and somebody has a movie reel, or they'll have a box, even at these places that had top secret stuff going on, there's a lot of people that would keep notes. So my hope is always to try to find people that may be involved. I'm going to start though with the B-29, and the B-29 for most of the war, as we go into 43 and when it really comes into operation, this was the turning point when we finally got a long-range bomber that could reach out and go 4,000 miles, which, way over twice what the B-24 could do. 250 miles an hour, the fighters could barely catch it, the altitude it could fly at. It was a lot of top secret stuff that was inside here, and of course the Soviet Union wanted in a bad way to get a B-29 that they could tear apart, and it turns out that they not only got one, but they got four. All of our operations during Operation Matterhorn, we actually found bases in China that we got permission to be able to fly to the mainland of Japan, and out of Chengdu we actually had several flights. There were 4 flights that came out that ended up in Russian territory. So Siberia, we had a couple that actually came into the naval base, and the problem is Russia was not at war with Japan until literally a couple of days after we dropped the bomb. So they were not supposed to allow us to just freely land there. And when you had a mission that went over here and banged, that bombed the ore factory here, or the steel factory, or the aircraft factories here, and then they had problems from either anti-aircraft or whatever fighters, they would try to find a place that they could land because there was no option coming back. And sadly, they crash land there, and in many cases were flown in by Yak fighters that actually guided them to the base, and the Russians were like, we've got the technology now. So all the diplomatic maneuvers to try to get them back didn't happen. One of them crashed, the crew actually bailed out. The rest of them landed, so they had intact aircraft to go through, and they did. They tore it right down to the rivets. Going from our imperial system to the metric system was a little difficult for the Russians, as they converted everything over. The rubber and the tires, the plexiglass, all of these things that we had, this technology, they had to try to duplicate. They never got plexiglass right, they never got the tires right. They had a real problem rolling out the aluminum for the aircraft too, at the thickness that we were actually doing it. But everything was all here, and I always wondered, which one of these bombers did they tear apart? Which one did they keep to fly, to train the troops, or the flight crews? Which ones did they keep just on the ground to have a static display that they could measure? And now with the internet, I can go through using Google Translate and find many of the engineers that have written stuff in Russian, and actually figure it out. So we go through, and sure enough, one of the engineers says, I remember we came across a plaque near the bombardier seat. The B-29 aircraft was named in honor of the visit of the plant by the Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force. This was the General Hap Arnold special that they tore apart right down to the rivet. So we know, and here he is signing the aircraft right here, we know that that was the aircraft that they tore down, right down to pieces, and rebuilt it. Everything in there was pretty much the most modern we had, except the radios. So they had a real problem with the radio, except for the fact that we were sending all of our B-25 Mitchells over there. So in Russian it says we didn't need the B-29's radio because they were sending us the SCR 522s that were all inside the Mitchell. So we were handing our technology over to them as well. Technically we were supposed to be friends, but we know what happened at the end of the war, and now all of a sudden it's the turning point. Would they now have a bomber that can actually reach the continental United States? And that's a turning point for when we start to think about how do we defend ourselves against that. That's getting us now into the missiles. You have to fly a missile up, and the best once we came up with atomic weapons, get close enough and you could take out an entire sortie with one nuclear weapon, and that was the push to try to do it. Take the technology that was coming out and do it. The Tupolev, though, the Bull never went into combat. The Chinese did get a bomber like this, but we never saw it used against the United States. But this is exactly what it looked like, and it's pretty much an exact duplicate of what the B-29 was. Now, we took information from the war as well, and we're going to talk about this as we started to, the Russians came in, we came in and started capturing many of the areas where they were building the V-2 rockets. A lot of that information that they had taken, what Goddard was doing in the States, and von Braun has been developing was top secret in Germany. And we found a lot of that underground. In fact, I've got a really quick video that'll show you what that actual mission was there. And really, once the British figured out that this was an area to attack, they went in and flew and knocked them back a ways so that they really couldn't use the V-2. The V-1 was also being developed here as well.
Development of one of World War II's most top-secret weapons took place in northern Germany, at Peenemünde on the Baltic Sea, where test flights could be flown with very few people knowing about it. A young scientist and new Nazi, Werner von Braun, had worked his way to director at the missile testing area here, and by 1939 they were making progress on a pilotless aircraft that could fly 200 miles and over 50 miles high. Von Braun and others were using ethanol, a liquid fuel, along with liquid oxygen to lift payloads heavy enough to carry an explosive warhead, with revelations in gyros and radio control that could guide the missile over the English Channel and to other enemies as well. The British had been warned of flying bombs, but it went largely unheeded, even after the Oslo report brought word of the facility in northern Germany. It would be 3 years before a flyover of reconnaissance planes confirmed the nightmare of the V-2, and a plan was developed to stop it. Peenemünde was celebrating successful flights, but had barely gone to production when the British started taking interest. This blown-up Hinkel 111 shows when one V-2 exploded, raining debris on the Nazi airfield near the missile range. It was Pad 7 that was finally spotted by British intelligence, and Operation Crossbow was launched with the U.S. military. The British took the first round on August 17, 1943. 596 aircraft flew a low-level night attack, dropping 1,800 tons of bombs, directed mostly at the scientists. Sadly, the bombers lined up on flares that put them slightly off target, hitting the housing of the labor force, killing nearly 600 slave laborers. Von Braun escaped and was put in charge of moving the scientists and workforce south to an underground mine some 200 miles away. Thousands of slave laborers died digging the facility and in production of the V-2. Peenemünde fell to the Soviets in May of 1945, but most of the facility had been destroyed by the Germans themselves. 2 lead scientists were captured and transferred to Russia in October of 1946. The Allies had a plan of their own to capture technology and knowledge. They found von Braun in the Austrian Alps, and with President Truman signing Operation Paperclip, over 100 Nazi scientists came to New Mexico to fly captured V-2s at White Sands.
So think of this, 300 boxcars worth of missiles that come out of here in pieces and parts, and now they also have the people that can actually put it together. And now several universities that had been studying what the A4, or later what was called the V-2, would do, these guys had the technology to be able to advance that. Now, in fairness, von Braun had always said he was shooting for the moon, and obviously the Hitler had taken it to another direction. Many of the scientists that work on these two, they were all, especially U of M, initially came in to say, we're just working on the ionosphere. We want to go into the 200-mile up and do sampling and stuff. But the military saw the potential of what they could do with this, and that's where it started to change. We see that the Space Physics Research Lab at University of Michigan first going out to, under invite from Wright-Patterson, which at the time was called Wright Field, going to New Mexico to the brand new White Sands to start tearing apart these missiles and trying to make them so that they could carry heavier payloads, and also come up with a way that they could actually keep the rocket from crashing. Remember, these were never designed to land. They were designed to blow up on target. So they actually came up with parachute systems and such to try to minimize the damage to the rockets as they were carrying up, especially a lot of high altitude sampling equipment to go up as well. We see right away they came to Willow Run. So here you see Hangar 1 and what would eventually become the terminal here with even a B-24 sitting on there. But look at the date of this, requisition in 46. Even before University of Michigan got control of this base, they actually had property in areas where they could actually set up labs here. So by 1946, scientists were already coming in here and starting to develop a lot of this rocketry, and especially the missiles, the guided rockets, what we consider a missile. So this is actually from Bentley Library. You can actually see where they're telling them which room numbers they can use for this technology going in. Finally, there was a big plan that came out, and they figured U of M was a good fit because it's a nonprofit university, and they were looking for getting rid of all of these air bases. So Romulus Air Base would become Detroit Metro eventually. We had Selfridge that they were talking about selling, but thank goodness they kept it as a military facility. In Willow Run, they were going to access everything. The military eventually decided to keep all of the East Ramp for a while, and they came up with this plan in the Chamber of Commerce actually in Detroit, where the guys that were telling U of M, you need to get on this. So the Chamber of Commerce had their own aviation branch at that time, working especially with the Detroit City Airport, trying to figure out what they were going to do. Now look at this technology that came into Willow Run too. Soviet markings on these tanker cars. These are oversized, so for our trains, we have a bit more narrow base. These giant tankers that would haul fuel were actually used for a pressure chamber to actually build a wind tunnel that could do Mach speed here. So this is an installation right here at the hangars that were right by the end of the runway. I'll show you an aerial in a second. But this was designed to be able to test missiles flying at Mach speed, and of course jet aircraft as well. One of the first Mach speed tunnels that were coming out. You see the signing going here. This is Upfield. This is the guy that actually was in charge of Detroit's war assets, signing them over. Here's the president of U of M at the time. This guy was actually a herpetologist, so he's a snake doctor. He knew all about garter snakes, believe it or not. And then the vice president Briggs, who was in charge of all the acquisitions for property, signing the papers now for $1 to get this entire complex here and start to dream up plans of what the university would do. They wanted to do all kinds of airport management classes here, anything you can think with an airport except flight school. They never had a flight school from that, which is kind of interesting. These are the files that they have, and as you go through and you see M679, this is one of the earliest plans that they did, and Bill Dow was actually the guy that was in charge of the lab at the time. I'm going to throw out a couple of names of people here, but there were so many people involved, I'm doing a discredit to Willow Run because there's so many people that were involved, and a lot of that stuff I have not uncovered yet. Some of it, it's not really classified, it's just in areas that I can't locate, and it's just a matter of time before, going to especially National Archives in DC is where I'd probably find a lot of this. Frank Patterson at the Air Force Museum too. But you see a lot of this called Project Wizard. Wizard is the name of this rocket program that he's been working on to try to go to the moon eventually is what they were hoping. But in the short term, Wizard was just to take a V2 rocket and convert it over. We see the Detroit City Airport at this time is growing so big that the Douglas aircraft that are there, the DC-3s, are fine at that airport, but once we went to 4s and 6s with the 4 engines, now carrying up to 40, 50 people and all their luggage, we don't have a runway long enough to be able to do that. And that became a real problem as these guys were looking to grow, and you've got all those housing units around. Through eminent domain, they could have thrown people out of their houses, but you know what happened when we did so many of the highways, that people were displaced, and it wasn't very equal the way they were doing it against African Americans and white people. So I think this really held them up, and it's really kind of sad for that airport because it's a shadow of what it used to be now. But in 47, all of that stuff started to come to Willow Run. Here we've got a base that had 4-engine bombers coming out of here with runways going in every direction imaginable, and all the technology was pretty much brand new. Here's a cool aerial showing you all of those runways, showing you the mounds where they actually shot the machine guns to test them. Here's Hangar 2 where they would actually use all the airlines. So American Airlines moved in. We saw Pan Am. We saw Capital was a big airline at the time moving into here. And then here would be the terminal building. And on the second floor is where those secret labs were for Willow Run from University of Michigan. Of course, this is the largest building in the world when it was built. This is the big B-24 plant that actually became Kaiser Frazer. So they started building cars and even a couple of cargo planes that came out of there as well. At least one model that was built there. And look at, here's those Russian tank cars inside the wind tunnel that was inside the warm-up hangar that was at the end of the runway. And Willow Run, the actual water that constitutes the name of this area, is right there as well. This is the dedication that I found in the file. Very interesting. So you're looking at the date of May 29th, 47 is the official birthday of the Willow Run Airport as it becomes a commercial enterprise. You see a luncheon, you see a helicopter flight with a mail coming in, you see a band, and then you see a formation flight coming out of Grosse Ile, which Grosse Ile was looking for a new place that they could get, put their planes. They had outgrown, as they went into jet aircraft, they'd outgrown Grosse Ile, looking for a place to go. The Admiral hated Willow Run, did not want to put it here, and they eventually went to Selfridge. So the very coolest part, though, the bottom. During the afternoon, a P-80, so the first jet that came out of World War II for the Americans, is scheduled to arrive at Willow Run from Montreal. And this is significant because, remember, I'm a shipwreck guy, right? It says it's duplicating the journey that Cadillac made when he founded Detroit in 1701. So it took Cadillac 49 days to go all the way down through the river system across Lake Erie and into the river. It takes this jet 60 minutes. So it's cool that they would tie that together as part of their program. Welcome inside the giant hangar. This is what the airport looked like, and at Christmas time I cannot imagine what it would take to heat this. It could not have been cheap. Just a massive open hangar with all of the American agents were all out in the front here. Post office here, movie theater back here, telephone. It had everything you'd ever need. Just incredible. And when you see what they did to it in the 50s to make it even cool and mod, you'll be impressed as well. Here we see the Hangar 1. This would be the building that became their main terminal. And of course, the second floor is where we saw so much of the first development of University of Michigan. Here's the wind tunnel buildings right here. 5 left if you're going to land right there. And what else do we have? The massive plant that's right there. The history again of this plant goes into so much cool stuff, from B-24s and going into when Kaiser took over. This is the coolest car I found from it. The Allstate. You could buy this at the Sears catalog and actually get a car from a catalog. I don't know why I'm so surprised. You could buy a house in the Sears catalog as well. So it was pretty amazing. We're amazed at Amazon today, but everything seemed to come from a catalog. But this, was incredible. This is 3.5 million square feet. This museum, thank heavens, is saving part of it, so at least that legacy is still there. But this is also the area when Livonia's plant caught fire, the transmission plant. They were able to come here, and it helped to get, keep GM's transmissions running. They actually had military projects that were happening there as well. So much came through here, and then of course GM built their own plant just not too far from here. Here's our earliest drawings of some of the V2 trajectories as they were doing different power settings, trying to figure out what it would take to actually take a payload up. And it just shows you in the GAPA program, this is all of the ground-to-air pilotless aircraft that they were working on. So they knew that the future was in these radio-controlled and gyro-controlled missiles that they didn't need to have a pilot in. And the GAPA projects went to just about every major university that you could think of. Bumblebee was the Navy project for Johns Hopkins. Meteor was through MIT. MIT was also working on a massive computer system we'll talk about that the SAGE computer came out, the semi-automatic ground environment computer that came out. General Electric Project Thumper was one out for a while, 794. American Navajo became much of our space travel flights. Project Wizard, again, showing up now with the ramjet technology that we'll talk about in a minute. And look at how Boeing is teaming up now with U of M's Michigan Aeronautical Research Center. This is where the name BOMARC comes from. Boeing and Mark, BOMARC, comes out of this. So this is the first university to ever have their name on a missile, too. But it's kind of bizarre to think about. Nike is also another project that was going on. Boeing's project being long range, 400 miles they're looking at. Nike being short range missiles they were doing. Then the Army split, the Air Force came in. All the funding started to get fights between these two right here. And Eventually BOMARC won out, but the Nike was a project that was delivered first. So we'll talk about that one. This is Rouge Park. This is still a park, by the way. And this guy's coming up out of the coffin area, the magazine area. And there's a couple of neat things that the design of these Nike bases were. The profile, and I don't call them bases, I should call them installations, because a base is so much more massive. These, they were really worried that they were going to take up a lot of space, and as we talked about Detroit City Airport, there wasn't a lot of space around Detroit. If you're going to defend Detroit, you can't give up 100 acres for 10 different bases, 15 different bases around Detroit. So to come up with a plan to have an underground magazine that allows them to slide the missiles to the launchers and then actually bring them up and fire them was a big deal to keep that profile down to just 40 acres in case of several of them. So I'll show you one of them. This is all pictures that came out of Bentley Library, as Bell Telephone was a big technology for all of this, connecting all the bases together into the computer systems as well. And sadly, all of this stuff is gone now. All of it's been erased since 1974. Here's a quick look at the Nike system, and I'll take you to Commerce. If you've been up by Commerce Township, there was a base that was up there, and I'll show you what's left of it and how it's kind of ironically gone back to a new use.
18 missiles stood watch underground here in Commerce Township, Michigan. We're about 28.5 miles northeast of downtown Detroit. This was part of our line of defense. If Soviet bombers somehow made it through our northern defenses, this being the 10th of the Nike bases built to defend the Motor City. Using aerial photography from 1960 to 1990, I can pinpoint that this was the exact location of the high-power radar, nearly 100 feet tall, looking much like Disney's World Epcot Center, only about a third the size. This radome actually provided long-range detection of targets, with 3 other target-ranging radars on site to lock on and track the enemy using computer accuracy developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories. Sites like this could be triggered by 63 radar sites from Alaska to Greenland, the DEW Line. This was an effort to minimize the threat of Soviet bombers and eventually missiles in the 1960s.
Nike Hercules, in more than 500 test and training firings, has demonstrated an amazing ability to seek out and destroy various targets, from about 1,000 up to more than 150,000 feet at altitude. This intercept, altitude above 60,000 feet, target speed in excess of 1,500 miles per hour.
In addition to the missiles, supersonic fighters also augmented the defense. They were based on Lake St. Clair.
Typical of the high-caliber team selected for William Tell are these men from Selfridge Air Force Base, Michigan. They fly the F-106 Delta Dart, one of the mainstays of air defense. Lieutenant Colonel Dunaway is team captain. Captain Hal Klinger flies fourth slot and is team weapons officer. And Sergeant Bill Cummings, veteran crew chief, is chief airplane doctor.
Over Detroit.
The 71st Ironman Interceptor Squadron guarded the Motor City for a decade starting in 1957. They won the William Tell competition in 1965, targeting drones with Falcon rockets.
Firepower loaded on the F-106 Delta Dart includes an advanced model of the Falcon missile and the Genie rocket. A product of Convair, this Delta Wing jet interceptor is equipped with data link for automatic control. Capable of speeds up to 1,500 miles per hour, the Delta Dart is the fastest, highest flying, most advanced all-weather interceptor in the air defense inventory.
High-flying Delta Darts were augmented with no less than 18 Nike Ajax and Hercules facilities. Underground magazines of missiles kept the installation size minimal, with each being divided up into a radar and barracks area, or integrated fire control, and the missile assembly area and launch site. The X-band beacon built into the missile tracking radar would transmit pitch and yaw direction to the Nike and detonate the warhead as it approached an enemy target. Nuclear capable, the Michigan Hercules only carried a high explosive warhead, but with an 87-mile range and a 150,000-foot ceiling, It could get close enough to detonate several bombers. Fueling a Nike required awkward, heavy rubber suits to protect the soldiers from the extremely toxic and flammable liquid propellant. Up to a dozen military policemen could be assigned to a Nike base, and German shepherds were trained to make sure there was no unauthorized access. This canine security is a bit ironic now, 60 years later, as this part of Commerce's radar site will soon be fenced again as a dog park.
This launch area and the IFC were all mandated as a public park once the Army decommissioned D-87 in 1974. These 3 acres became Dodge No. 5 State Park, which was leased as an outdoor camp and later a drug rehab facility. At one time, it was even targeted for a new prison, and as late as 1993, the base was used as a barracks for troubled youth in a project called Camp Oakland. Vandals burned most of the property after the DNR ran out of money to keep it up, so the township bulldozed it. This is actually where the magazine section of the entire base was, and while the old IFC has been filled in and now has a parking lot for a dog park, here you can still find pieces of the base itself lying all over. And it's interesting, there's even depressions where maybe they filled in some of the old part of the base, but with paint on here, there's no doubt this was part of D-87, the Nike base that was here at one time.
264 sites once populated the United States from Maine to Alaska, with the last fixed air defense missile facility closing in the Florida Everglades in 1979. Many of Detroit's sites are parks or industrial areas. If you ever want to see what these bases looked like during the Cold War, there's a fantastic museum near San Francisco, and also a well-preserved site at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. The Nike Hercules is also on display nearly a mile south of the old Riverview, Michigan site.
Interesting that Wyandotte has Hercules. They never had Hercules there, so it's nice to have the modern rocket, the ones that actually switched off of liquid fuel, went to a solid fuel, but they never had them actually there. This would be their typical range for the longer range Hercules, and it shows you it was right up into Saginaw Bay. 1974 is when they kind of made that cutoff with the funding basically getting pulled. Most of our Nike stuff went to Europe, and that's where we see a lot of the West Germans getting this technology, and some of our bases moving there as well. One of the questions that I have from all of this is the numbers that are D-87, D-23, as we look at Belle Isle, that actually had missiles there, D-26. This is all based on a compass that's not 360 degrees, but 100 degrees. And I don't get why that is, but this, if you line up this area, to put it underneath so the radials all line up with D-97 and 87, it puts you right here, and it puts you in the middle of middle of Detroit. The only thing I can think of, you'd think that the shortest distance between all these points would be the most important, but I don't think that is. I think they split the difference between the naval base here and the Army base later, Coast Guard, and of course Marines and everything there. And I think that that's why that compass lines up that way. So here we have technology that's coming out. Excuse me for a second. The ramjet. We saw that this is the one that made that incredible run, the P-80, making that run from Montreal in 60 minutes. The first operational jet that we had in the arsenal of the United States. And going into a Lockheed, well, the Marquardt jet engine, the ramjet engine, was the one that really made this popular. And most people were looking at that for their rockets to make sure that we would have a missile that would launch, and then when it went to the cruise stage to go supersonic, they would use the ramjet to be able to get to that. And this was the one that they finally went with. After testing, they put this together on a missile, and they called it the flying stovepipe. You can tell because it had this giant piece, but it meant business. In '51, it achieved over 1,000 miles an hour, and by 1958, it was doing Mach 4.31. That's pretty incredible for an engine that still breathes air. You know, it's not considered to be something we would do like an Apollo flight. So this technology goes together. The ramjets go into the Boeing rocket, And this is really where I start to lose how much U of M had into this. So Wizard morphs into this project, and at this point, most of the indications that I get is that University of Michigan went to the ground component of the computers that would track it. So they went in very heavily into radar, and then eventually into electronic countermeasures to jam radar, and of course into aperture radar that we'll talk about in a minute too, that'll take us right into the NASA flights as well. So Boeing in 1951 had the B-52 coming off. This is a top secret project that eventually would be released and of course become the most flown bomber in history. They moved everything to Wichita and were doing most of the BOMARCs out of Wichita. And this is where they had 700 missiles in different pieces that actually came out. Some of the pictures from Boeing are neat where they show the assembly line of how they put it together. You actually see the missiles coming through and being put together and then sent off to Van Nuys where they had the ramjets actually installed. This is a great video to kind of show you what the BOMARC's capability was going to be and how they were going to use that semi-automatic ground environment computer system developed by MIT to hopefully thwart the threat of these bombers that could fly over the top of the United States, over Canada, from the Soviet Union and come in and attack the United States.
The airborne threat includes bombers capable of operating at any altitude between the surface and 60,000 feet, and at speeds up to 1,300 knots. Some aircraft would carry thermonuclear bombs. Defense against airborne threats boils down to protection of certain classes of targets. Our strategic air command bases at ICBM sites. A potential enemy must destroy these bases suddenly and completely. Otherwise, our retaliation would turn his action into a form of national suicide. With a wide margin of performance superiority, United States Defense Forces set up requirements for the IM-99 weapon system, a combination of highly advanced BOMARC missiles and missile bases designed to operate within the electronic ground environment of the SAGE system. SAGE receives early warning of hostile aircraft from many sources. The Distant Early Warning Line, the Mid-Canada and Pine Tree Line, Airborne Early Warning Radar, and picket ships. Texas Towers, automatic long-range input. The BOMARC responds automatically, without the need of last-minute preparation. The SAGE computer supplies flight programs to any number of missiles within a few seconds. The BOMARC A requires only a 90-second automatic warm-up. The BOMARC B requires none.
Boston Beach.
Captain Armishaw, Alaska. You recognize my voice?
Yes, I do.
We have had 4 interceptors shadowing Echo Zulu for the last 10 minutes. They've closed into close range. They made it positive identity that these are hostile planes. On closing further, the bombers have commenced firing on our interceptors.
Are you absolutely positive of this?
Yes, we are positive. One of the 102s has sustained damage.
WD2? WD2, this is Senior Weapons Director. On track Juliet 0902. It's a jamming formation. Scramble up to 20 BOMARCs.
Roger, 20 BOMARCs.
Possible position 400 miles out. Intercept point for BOMARC 280 miles out. For Combat Air Patrol 210 miles out. Against this jamming formation, the computer recommends immediate attack with BOMARCs.
Roger. Activate.
BOMARCs came out, they realized they were way off schedule, so they started off with the A model, and they finally came up with the longer range B models. They initially wanted 70 bases all across the country to be able to house these, and of course the battle for money at this time was so much in Congress that they pared that down, and eventually they only built 10 of the bases. But the new BOMARC B would actually come into Michigan, which was a big coup for Kinchlow Air Force Base, which ironically would actually be shut down not too far after that. This is, we're going to talk a little bit about this triangle for the rest of the night. This is the airfields that were at Raco, and Raco has a very unique name for the Upper Peninsula. It's named as really a hyphenation of Richardson Avery Company, which were the lumber companies that came up there. Raco became the entire area here that they were harvesting trees. Actually, mostly after all the big white pines were gone, this is more for them to make charcoal to actually create steel. And so it was more grabbing the hardwoods that were better for making that charcoal as well. But that was what this was this whole base was built in this old lumber town. Here's the BOMARC facility here. Here's the 90 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. This base was actually built to protect the Sioux. Think of what a pinch point that was for all of the steel of the United States during World War II. And we had one little area where all the ships would line up. If that was taken out by any enemy forces, even by sabotage, it would be devastating. So they had balloons that flew over there. They had airplanes that could fly out of Raco to help support that area to make sure that wouldn't happen. Here's where Raco is, the little diamond you see right here. Mackinac Bridge would later be right here. Mackinac, you can smell the fudge right there. We got here, Camp Raco too was a conservation camp. And for many of the people, even my grandpa actually went to the UP to work in these programmed by FDR to try to bring in some money. And these guys all worked in the lumber industry, mostly planting new trees, also fighting a lot of the fires that were up there. And when the war came, now they had at least 5 camps in the UP that were perfect for POWs. So when we see the big war going into especially North Africa, and Rommel was captured, most of these guys came to the Upper Peninsula. We saw a lot of them come into the 5 camps that were here. What happened was all those camps would have sponsors of lumber companies that would say, all of our workforce is at war now, we need people to come and help. Now the Germans, because of the Geneva Convention, did not have to work. They would get 10 cents if they stayed home, or they could get 80 cents a day that they could spend at the canteen. Up to 2 beers a day is what they could get. And they would have pretty much free range to work cutting these trees down. Nothing heavy duty, it was all light duty, cutting the trees. I mean, I'll definitely, work. But you see the headline coming out of the Sioux paper, not coddle these guys. And they didn't have to have their picture taken either when they came in. There's movies that I haven't found yet that were taken in the Upper Peninsula at Sidnaw, where they actually still have one of the guard towers from that base as well. But this is what Raco became. A tragedy too during this time. When they were training for World War II, they accidentally left a couple bazooka shells out there, and sadly kids found it. And we had a whole family destroyed in the UP, and a big lawsuit that came out of it as well. But Raco would become the first BOMARC B site, long-range missile site, and it's right in Michigan. And this is the actual video of when they built it, and some of the background for it.
On May 18, 1959, construction was begun on the first BOMARC B missile base. Installation began September 1st, 1960, and has just been completed.
The BOMARC A missile has been operational for quite some time at 5 Air Defense Command sites along the eastern seaboard. However, the missiles at Kinchlow are advanced B models, the second generation Boeing BOMARC. Although similar in outward appearance, the B missile has incorporated several major improvements over the A. Among these are solid boost rocket and advanced ramjet engines, which contribute to increased performance and range. The range of the B missile is in excess of 400 miles, or approximately twice that of the A. For example, an area protection from Kinchlow from attacking aircraft ranges from Rochester, New York, to Columbus, Ohio, Muncie, Indiana, and as far west as Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Duluth.
The actual firing of missiles would be controlled from the Combat Center at Madison, Wisconsin. When radar and reconnaissance information is received indicating the approach of hostile aircraft, the information is fed into computers, which supply accurate air intercept time and range data. The BOMARCs are programmed and ready for firing within seconds.
There will not be any BOMARC firings at Kinchlow or any other base unless we are attacked. It is hoped, of course, that this situation will never arise. However, it is assuring to know that we have an effective defense system should we need it. Since our ability to defend North America from aerial attack is significantly strengthened by the addition of the BOMARC B, we therefore believe that today, the operational date of the first of these new missile bases, Kinchlow, is an important milestone to our defense system.
You know, there's some tension right now with our Canadian friends with our change in leadership. This is no different. JFK actually called the premier there, allegedly, an SOB, because he wouldn't take these BOMARC missiles, and there was a big blow-up that actually had one of their guys actually removed during an election over taking nuclear weapons into Canada. They eventually did bring them in for a little bit, North Bay and up in Quebec, and that did give us a good net, but it stopped at 10 bases, and by then they started to realize our threat was no longer bombers, it was going to be ICBM missiles, so it kind of outlived itself nearly as fast as we had problems politically with getting those missiles in. And they were dangerous. I mean, it was without, there's certain merit of having a nuclear weapon in your backyard, and we see from this declassified that even Kinchlow had a leak of the warhead. We know in New Jersey one caught fire and melted down, and they had radiation problems there. I mean, it was trace, it wasn't horrible, and they coated 4 inches of concrete over the top of it to seal it up, but it's still off limits for people to go in that area. So there was a danger involved. And as these missiles got basically taken out of the arsenal, they realized this would actually make a really good target. So as we started to develop the F-4, the Phantoms, these guys were actually used in a couple of projects, and more that were actually canceled, where they brought many of these out of retirement. The Navy had several to test Sidewinders. They tried to get those for the Air Force to do F-4 training in a project called Combat College that never happened. So there's not a whole bunch of firing of the 10As, as they're called, once they had the programming by drone. But at least it had a little longer life that came out for the millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars that we put into these missiles. So let's come back to Willow Run. While all this is going on, they're all developing the BOMARC. These guys are continuing on with top secret projects that continue into Project Michigan, Project Wolverine that are happening here. They're moving into combat surveillance radar. They're moving into infrared technology, and the rumor is that during Vietnam that these labs were actually finding ways to look through clouds, look through darkness, to actually find a North Vietnamese fire from the sky, which we really didn't have an airborne radar that could track, or any kind of an infrared system that could track. Out of these labs too, we see Leith coming up with this incredible photography of 3D synthetic aperture radar, which we'll see actually goes to the shuttle program. All of that wasn't invented here, but it was perfected in these buildings very close to where we're at right now. And of course, pioneer work in holography and such. We're looking at an aerial picture now. This is out of the Holographic Visions book, and you can actually see this is where we're sitting right now inside this building. So as we look over here, we can see all the developments that were happening. The first Ruby Maser was in a big hangar that was actually here until it caught fire in 2004. Much of the aperture radar was coming out of this building here. And then we see a push to start to go on the other side of Beck Road as well into another facility. The timing of this going into this secret lab part, I don't have down, but I know by the 1960s they were over there and they were starting to come up with much of the technology that was going to go into electronic countermeasures and jamming and such, and a lot of that hasn't really come out to what happened. What we see in the newspapers for U of M, especially during the Vietnam War, is a lot of pushback from a liberal college saying we don't want anything to go into war, and as things were leaked out of what they were doing here, it became almost to a little war happening here, where they were calling these guys Dracula and goons and and sellouts for helping the military, and there's a big push to tell the college not to work on anything military. And then you see a real big pushback from the engineers here, writing articles saying, listen, we make sensors the projects that they were working on at this time period, were basically defensive weapons, and it was a good message, I think, to send back. But you read the text, you say here, my cloak is only paper, my dagger rubber. So they're fighting this whole James Bond thing. My computer display blinks, and my laser is about as deadly as a flashlight. And it says here, the only evil sneer I could get out, sinister sneer, was one with a laugh. So Innes basically pushing back, and then the column that came with this underneath was, all the dead people in Laos, are laughing at your sneer or something like that. I mean, just not even a fair fight the way that they were writing this out. And I'm not belittling that, but it starts to get crazy in the 1980s when the students start to come in. They move most of the operations for Willow Run as they're building brand new chambers on campus in the engineering building, and they start to sit in during especially the big anniversaries of Nagasaki, where they come in and they sit in and they talk about how this basically the university is killing people with their weapons. And this guy, Dr. Senior, is actually one of the directors of the Willow Run Labs. It changes its name to become more of the environmental research facility. He pushes back to say, listen, I'm doing lightning research right now, which is mostly true, but 2 years before this, he was doing actual radar imprints of the B-52G. So I do know that there were military objectives here, and much of our stealth technology has been linked to University of Michigan, who did some of the earliest reflective tests on aircraft to see how they could invent one that would be invisible to radar. So there certainly, again, is an offensive piece to this as well. Here we're looking at the Beck Road project. If you go by today, and I did, most of you drove by and didn't even notice, the gate is closed. It says just Willow Run, U of M. This is when it was in full usage, when they were doing a lot of the SAR stuff, a lot of the aperture radar stuff, that we're going to talk about how that developed into an incredible thing for the world. And now if you look at a current one, I have to laugh at why there's nobody out protesting this, because this is all a hazardous waste dump for the university that's across the street. And this is typically where you'd see a lot of people with their signs saying, no, this is licensed for radioactivity, it's licensed for flammable, it's licensed for toxic. So it certainly is an operation, but it shows you that you do need to have that component, especially if you have a medical lab that's doing all kinds of work to cure cancer and do things like that. So there has to be a balance between the two. Here we're looking at a conversion of Willow Run. There's a big push now with Metro getting bigger. At one time the military said, we can't even fly there because there's no taxiways. You had to back taxi on the main runway. And so they said it's just not viable. Well, of course, the funding starts to come. McNamara starts to help them out. That's why you have the McNamara terminal. They start to get a little more funding, and they're fighting for funding with Willow Run. They bring in Yamasaki and Albert Kahn to do a $1.2 million overhaul inside, and they turn that into a beautiful space holding those plywood boxes that become this gorgeous airport. And we see this flight come out. This is great. This is stuff from the Historical Society. This is way before I moved down from the UP, so I never got a chance to see it. And actually, before I was born in '58, this flight is pretty amazing. They go up, they take off, and they're clearly going to Canada. And when I looked at the date, I thought, oh, that's kind of cool, because look at the places they go to as we take off from the runway here. The back story is that Pan Am has already gone to Metro. We've got, most of the airlines are now starting to talk about maybe moving over to Metro, that there would be a lot more infrastructure there. It was closer to go to Metro, and that was the big push. But look at, this is only a year old now. In 1958, the Mackinac Bridge was brand new, so the first traffic was starting to go across there. And just seeing UP, this, for me, crossing the bridge when you go, it's like going home, as you go into what we call God's country. It's wonderful. It just almost seems like time slows down as you go across the bridge. I love the fact that you get a good glimpse of the runway here. One of the most difficult landings I've done is at Mackinac Island. And of course, Round Island, beautiful little lighthouse here, and of course, Pablo Island. So neat flight there. But sadly for the airport, it was written down by 1959. All the people were saying, we're going to hold out. They called them rebel airlines. Capital was saying, we're never going to move. We're always going to be here. And then you start to see United start to look at buying Capital, and they become this partnership. and then this mass defection starts to happen where they all go to a better opportunity. Now their rates here, they actually had 4 years of losing money at Willow Run, but by the time it got 4 years into the, you know, the black, they were making money hands over fists at Willow Run because the cost was so low. What did U of M have into it? $1, you know, to do it. So it looked like it might be saved, but then they immediately started at this point to start looking at doing more cargo, which is obviously what they've done today. And the last flight took off out of here. United took off at midnight on 1966 in June. The military component did come in for a slight time. In fact, if you look in the back here, this is actually the Packard hangar that Packard was doing all kinds of jet engine training or testing during World War II. And the hope was that they were going to be able to keep this component here, but it didn't take long before the 472nd went back to Selfridge, and then we saw the 30th Air Division, as you saw in my video. It was now at Madison, left here and went there, and that whole component of the military was out, this being a T-33 trainer, and the F-80s and stuff all went back to Selfridge. So let's get back to Raco, the space, and the radar lab. So now we see a new name for Willow Run Labs. It's now the RAD Lab. Now all of this technology that's going into the CERSI system is actually being developed by JPL from stuff that happened in this area and actually put into a radar system that you see right here on board the shuttle. And they're going to come back to Raco where our BOMARCs were, because it's so easy to find a diversity of pines and coniferous trees. And they would go back in the spring to actually try to measure it using this incredible radar that could tell the difference between a maple tree and a pine tree from outer space. So we see the Endeavour comes up. We consider this upside down, right? So they take the radar, it has to face the Earth and it has to be perpendicular. So they flip over with 426 maneuvers to fly all the way across and cut these 23-mile-an-hour swaths with the radar going and hit all these places around the world. Remember that the space shuttle can go around the world in 90 minutes. So it's doing this path really, really fast, but they have to ground truth what they're seeing with the pattern that's coming out in real time with people on the ground. So University of Michigan heads to the UP, to Raco, to that field, and they start setting up the areas. And we actually have Raco Field. Look at this, it's glowing from outer space practically. Here's Kinchlow, and of course Sioux, Canada, and then we have Whitefish Point. I'm at the board of directors at the museum up there. Look at the glint is making it glow pretty incredibly. So let's go for a quick space mission and hear how they call out to Raco, Michigan, where the BOMARC was initially launched with technology that was developed by University of
12,
Michigan.
11, 10, 9, 8, 7, we have a go for main engine start, 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Endeavour on a mission to study the Earth's ever-changing environment.
This is the second mission.
Space Radar Lab is a state-of-the-art imaging radar, and we're going to show you here in this view as we come down from the overhead windows our CERSI XR radar out in the payload bay. Now, the radar out in the cargo bay, CERSI XR, is a synthetic aperture radar. It paints a picture of the Earth's surface through darkness and clouds and can thus operate around the clock all the way around our orbits every 90 minutes around the globe.
From the synthetic aperture radar instrument on board Endeavour as it passes over the Raco, Michigan supersite. These are live pictures from the XR instrument.
All different fields. East Lake coming up right there.
Raco, Michigan is one of the ecology sites being studied.
The ground looks just like it did then. We have a beautiful mosaic of fall colors beginning to develop, and you should be beginning to see lots of reds and yellows as you look down over our site in the days to come. You know, last night...
We'll certainly be looking for it. The lighting so far has made it a little hard to distinguish colors, but we have noticed a little bit greener inlet near the coastal lines of the Great Lakes. It's looked a little bit more fall-like.
Raco.
Well, that should be proceeding along rather quickly now. We've had 2 nights of good hard frost with clear weather and the drying, so fall is coming quickly upon us.
Main gear touchdown.
We're a flight museum. I have to show you the shuttle, right?
And nose gear touchdown. Endeavour rolling out on runway 22, the Edwards Air Force Base facility in California, after 183 orbits of the Earth, traveling 4,703,000 miles.
And what an incredible tie-in for the university, where this, stuff that was literally built for space exploration becomes a military target, and then eventually becomes now where we can actually scan over the field and tell you what's being developed there, how much agriculture is taking over areas, and even tell how plants are doing in certain areas at high speeds. This is the Raco triangle again, so here's the runways right here, bless you. And as we get in, the new use of this base is during the winter time, they can actually go in and turn this into an ice field and practice. And even during the summer, as we were talking, they can super cool cars down to 20 below zero and do heavy weather training on these vehicles. Smithers is doing mostly tires, and I asked him if I could use a quick video, and I'll end with this to showcase the airport that you'll see and how they're using it today. See the runways? Not far from where the BOMARC missile site was, and a center track right in the middle. And off-road tracks too, where they pile up heavy, high snow. They made a lot of snow this year. I have to believe the military never thought they'd use this for testing like this, but my sincere thanks to Smithers for sharing the video with us, for sure. Here we actually have a slide if you're interested in any of my documentaries. From the shipwreck stuff, I did bring some books. I think I have one copy of Bombs Away. When we flew, you see me here flying the last of the B-52s. This is coming out of Wordsmith Air Force Base. Just an honor to be able to showcase our incredible military men and women, not only through the Air Force, but I do a lot of stuff with the Navy, and of course the Coast Guard lets me fly on their helicopters and stuff, which we had fun breaking ice before the Mackinac was retired, the Sundew was retired. So many incredible stories that came out, and my job has always been to try to find those eyewitnesses. The captain that was on board when they saved the crew of the Carl Bradley in '58, many different survivors from big storms and stuff like that. So you can find my podcast. I have a lot of this stuff where you can just listen to it like a radio show. It's kind of fun to do, and then the lakefury.com site not only has that, but also all of the places I'll be appearing, which I'll be in Minnesota, I'll be in Duluth, and I'm going to Manitowoc, and it's going to be a crazy, Edmund Fitzgerald's 50th anniversary is this year, so I'm on the road. So any questions at all, what I've covered in some of the aviation stuff? Yeah?
You mentioned rocket and missile. What's the difference?
Rocket or unguided, and that's a great question. What's the difference between a rocket and a missile? Rockets are fired and forget, and they basically go in the direction they're going, but a missile would have some kind of a system to be able to track it, whether that be through radio, or radar systems and such, heat-seeking missiles. The guidance comes from that, and that would be a missile. Any other? Yeah.
So the big deal today is the Russians have hypersonics, but these sound like they were pretty fast.
Oh yeah, you're going as fast as in some cases the SR-71, so we definitely had the technology and probably didn't have to worry at that point because the pilots don't have to endure that. But definitely the missile now that we're worried about is the ICBM, and the submarine threat is that they can hide anywhere on the globe and launch. So how do you defend against something like that? And that's been our real mainstay, has been the fact that those can move around. That's why the UP got that entire ELF system, the extra low frequency system, that we could communicate with submarines while they were underwater. And again, that raised in the 80s when that went in. I remember a lot of people worried that we were going to grow extra ears and everything out of the ELF, which the environment is very important, and I don't belittle that at all. But obviously there was no problems with that. So yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned that the V2 used to be called the A4. Was the A4 like a prototype model that was never actually built?
It technically was the A4 for the whole thing, and I think when people realized that the Germans were calling it a Vengeance weapon, the Vengeance was the V in Vengeance 2. I think it was more scientific to call it the A4, so same name, just the Germans were the ones that kind of gave it that more ominous term afterwards, and I think a lot of people dropped. You know, the V1, the buzz bomb, was very infamous for making all that noise and flying across the channel, but really didn't have a lot of impact. I mean, they didn't have a chance to develop it to a point where the V2 was going to be a real problem because of the fact that it had such a longer distance it could go to and be even more guided too. Yeah.
Your reference to Ed McNamara? What was that about?
McNamara was actually involved in the legislature, and that was part of the funding. As they started to look, you start to see this fight between the two, and this is something I haven't investigated total, but...
I think you've got two McNamaras.
Oh, no kidding.
Yes. McNamara Terminal at Metro was named after Wayne County executive at McNamara.
Oh, no kidding. Well, I'm sure there's probably part of that in there too, but thank you very much. The same issue came up for me when I was doing a whole lecture on wood lumber ships. We lost a whole bunch, and if you watched National Geographic Explorer, I was featured on there talking about the Edward Hines fleet, and immediately what do we think about? We think of Edward Hines Drive as being, oh, that must be from the lumber industry. Same thing that you said. Different person. This guy was a road commission guy, had nothing to do with the lumber industry. So great point. Thank you very much. Yeah?
So the Nike bases kept the missiles underground?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, they were stored underneath there, and in many cases, if you go into New Jersey and such, they still have some of those areas, the underground. They call them coffins after a while, and it was kind of the part of the missile name as they developed them underground. People are walking, if you watch YouTube, you can see them crawling in, there's water inside these things. Ours are all filled in. In fact, the one place you saw me with a flashlight, it looked like a bear cave, and I wasn't going to go much closer than where I was at because I didn't know what the heck was inside there in the wintertime, but I was just trying to see how deep it might have went because I thought it might be part of that.
Yeah. The reason I asked that is that your presentations brought back some memories for me. So for instance, I flew out of Willow Run in '63 on a United Airlines 707.
Yeah.
But we went past the Nike base in Belle Isle, the Belle area. And I swear to God, I remember one of those suckers sticking up out of the air.
I'll bet. And if you go to right across from Belle Isle, near where the city airport is, you can still see one of the radar towers. It's cut off and you just see a platform where the radar would be. That's pretty much all we have from any of our bases that were around here.
There's still some down in Newport.
Is there? Oh, fantastic.
The stanchions.
Yep.
They call it Nike Park now.
Okay.
But right along Telegraph, there's one of the stanchions for one of the radars.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what's back in there anymore, but there's a big Ford facility back in there now, with some of it still fenced in with, you know, United States government, blah, blah, blah. But there's a little bit down at Newport yet. I was down there about a week ago. Yeah.
So much more homework to do now to try to find these extra spots. Because for me, it's fascinating to walk those areas and to do that. Just as much as it is for me to go on to a shipwreck and dive it and, you know, explore that. That's why I'm so fascinated with that history, is where the Nike bases were erased almost within a year of when they were gone. They turned them into parks, or they turned them into, in the case of Auburn Hills, immediately a factory went up there. So this was prime real estate, but the shipwrecks are down there and nobody bothers them. So that's why I'm so interested in diving those and seeing stuff that many people haven't seen. And we just discovered 2 more last summer, so we're still discovering. There's like 4,000 we haven't found yet.
There's one that's quite intact in Hobart, Indiana.
Cool.
It's turned into a paintball.
Really?
place, but a lot of the barracks are still there. I believe the launch, quote unquote, silos, which are remote, I think they're possibly still there. But that's one of the more intact ones in the Midwest. I'm from Chicago originally.
Yeah.
They were everywhere in Chicago. Wow. They were all over the place.
Yeah, you figured to protect
and you mentioned that to
big.
people, they look at you like nuts. No, there were missiles behind the Museum of Science and Industry.
And there really isn't much online. I mean, if you start to search for this type of information, it's stuff that's largely been forgotten. And in my case, it's wonderful to try to shake the trees and see if you can find some of the men that worked on these missiles to get these stories so we can at least talk about it. You know, there's a lot of footage. There's a lot of things that don't make sense until you talk to somebody that actually worked on them. That's what the next step for me, to try to find, you know, somebody that really knows all of this stuff that I could, you know, place together. Yep, in the very back.
Is there anything left of the Yamasaki design terminal?
No, I don't think. Has anybody been in that area to see what's left of the Yamasaki?
Just the hangar that I know of, I haven't been
Yeah.
there in quite a while.
I would love to go see it, and I've seen already that, you know, they're parking aircraft in what's left of the old B-24 location. And of course, your dollars are important as we look at these projects for the museum to do things with this. Anything that can be given, even to the point of estate planning, is where a lot of that funding comes from. So, you know, think of the museum, think of the history that gets, these are our repositories for our local history. They're not going to have a Willow Run, you know, museum someplace else. It's here. And for us to support this, not only from coming here and seeing me, but telling all of your friends about the incredible exhibits that are here, the amazing exhibits that, for me, this is one of the greatest museums in the Great Lakes. Of course, I'm biased. I love airplanes, but I love being here, and I certainly love sharing. Yes?
I just had a question. The Nike was anti-aircraft, right? So,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep, again, to get up into the area close and then explode and take out, hopefully.
Because I grew up really close to Rouge Park, and I remember probably in the early mid-'60s seeing one out.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, my memory's not that great, but I could recall.
Rouge and Utica are the two that had pictures taken. I only found one of Commerce, and there's very few pictures. But the surprising thing about all of this is they weren't shy about bringing people in. They wanted the Russians and the Soviets to know that we had these systems. So as soon as BOMARC came out, it was announced to the world. Most of this stuff, they didn't get into a lot of the particulars on range and stuff, but you'd be surprised at how many people had photographs and everything, and they talked very openly. They had tours of the bases, the installations that you could come and see as well. So sadly, a lot of that stuff doesn't exist. I mean, old newspapers that are, you know, the photos are long gone, and that's a tough call because we should be trying to gather that up now while we still have people that can tell us what we're looking at as well. Maybe final, yeah.
Is there any modern day missile defense system development in this state or in this area?
No, we've even seen all of our Air Force component. In fact, my Bombs Away was about the last mission really left Selfridge when our Air Force Reserve left, you know, and so we saw all of that footprint, if you will, and thank goodness. I mean, that threat was to the point where now we don't have to have nuclear missiles that are here or nuclear bombs in the cases. We can neither confirm nor deny that they were at the bases at Sawyer and Kinchlow, but after they left, they went out and they checked it with a Geiger counter, so you can draw your own conclusions as to what might have been there. But my dad worked on Hound Dog missiles, and once those left, that was pretty much it for, you know, when Sawyer's last plane left, I was on board it, we went to Minot, and believe it or not, 0026 is still flying. They're now re-engineing these B-52s for missions that, you know, these are planes that were built in the early 50s, so it's incredible to see all this technology in BOMARC that they just threw away after, you know, $100 million in technology, and they're done, and the B-52 has just been that you know, the go-to even after the B-1 came in, and even the B-2 in many cases. So it's impressive that we got our miles out of that one for sure. But I don't know of any other, there might be something that I'm not aware of, and I'm no genius when it comes to any of this stuff. But in my findings, no, I have not found anything more. Thank you to the museum. Thanks to all of you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick, again for coming out and speaking this evening. Reminder again, we have these programs the first Wednesday evening of each month. Next month, we are welcoming back a speaker that we had last year, I believe. He is a master presenter at Dreamfield Village. He's a Wright Scholar. His name is Kirk Haas, and he'll be talking about the feud between the Smithsonian Institute and the Wright Flyer. So put that on your calendar. The tickets will be available on the website starting tomorrow. Members can get in for free. We encourage you to share information about these events with your friends, families, neighbors, and other members. One last thing, we do have some donation boxes, so we very much appreciate your contributions. If you're willing to help out the museum a little bit, we really appreciate it. And thank you again for coming out tonight, and have a safe drive home. Thank you.